Hey friends, welcome to another episode of SpiritYOUality. I'm very fortunate to have Chris here with me, the Dr. Chris Lee. I promise that'll be the only time that
Blaze.
But thank you so much, man, for taking some time and hopping on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Dude, I'm stoked to be here. We've been on the telly for what, 4 minutes over here, and I don't think we've sworn yet, which is like a new record for me on a podcast. So cheers to new beginnings.
Here you go. I mean, we might have to fucking break that right now, but
we're doing so good. This is why we can't have nice things, Mr. Myers. This is it.
You know, we try.
That's all we can do, right? Try or try not, or be. What's that Yoda quote? Do you know the Yoda quote about trying?
Oh, there is no try. There's only there is no try.
That's it. Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah, something like that. I am probably disappointing so many of my friends who are diehard Star Wars people.
I mean, like, we're a minute into this and we're just like hardcore questions on Star Wars. Jeez, who is the second president of the United States? That's a real question. That's a functional question.
I'm pretty sure it's Darth Vader. So
I was going to say Betty White. So at least we're close. We're close together.
Ooh, that sounds better. Actually, I wish Betty White would have been president.
Would have crushed it. Can you imagine where we would be in our modern world if that was our second president?
No words.
Hard to imagine. Anyways, back to our regular scheduled programming.
Exactly. Thank you for keeping us on track. So for some friends and listeners, and even for those who may be familiar with your work, follow you, big fans, can you share more about, some of your journey into what took you to your place in your career, your passion for neuroscience, and, even some of your life experience that led you to have some of those passions?
Yeah, 200%. So for those of you that don't know, my stage name is Dr. Chris. If you ever run into me or whatever the heck it is, just call me Chris. I originally went to school, was in the process of like doing my doctorate, and like so many of us in our early 20s, we just are like, I'm going to be a billionaire entrepreneur. I'm going to have like the 2.5 dogs and the 1.7 kids and, maybe get a divorce when I'm 44 and like start feeling out some of that stuff. And I think a lot of us get this similar thing that I've had, at least I've experienced. I'm super curious about you, Dirk. There's this voice that you get in your head when you're like going to sleep in my early 20s. And even now I get that. And it's like going to sleep and the voice always says the same thing, or at least it does for me. It's like, is this it? Right? So like, I'm like going through and I'm supposed to be like in my like early 20s and just thriving and happy. And every time I try to go to sleep and I'm like doing a really meaningful like doctorate program too. And it's like, is this it? Like, or do you really want to go do this for the rest of your life? And, like any spiritually guided young man, I suppressed that motherfucker. Just like, yes, this is what everyone wants for us. This is what we want for us too. And it turns out like you shove that thing under like we do with our emotions. And it's like trying to hold a like beach ball under the water at the pool. You can like have it, but like when you start to move around or like, God forbid, you need to pick your nose and you have to hold it down with one arm, you're going to get like smoked in the face. And that was what ended up happening to me. I was about halfway through this program and was going to go out and open the practice and, start my process. And yeah, life hit me pretty hard. Started off, I got hit by a car. That was the easy part. I used to live in Atlanta and yeah, I'd ride my bike everywhere. Like I hated being still and stuck in class for like 8 hours a day. Especially in this program, we didn't do semesters, we did quarters. So you're just in class all the time and it's 10 weeks and then you have a midterm and a final and all of your grades are on 2 tests. So it's super high pressure. And in between, waking up at like, 5 a.m. to go to class for like 12, I would just ride my bike. So I was on my Goodwill 12-speed bike, always wore a helmet, but SUV blew a stop sign going pretty fast and ended up hitting me into a ditch. I was clipped into my bike. The bike did survive and then somebody stole it months later, but yeah, it messed me up pretty good. I got knocked unconscious, got sent to the hospital. My brother, who was also in the doctorate program, he ended up carrying me, waking me up. He's like, looks like you're like wet. Like, why are you laying on like the living room floor? And I was like, I think it's blood. So we went to the hospital and we did all those things. And like I'm saying, like, this is the easy part of my journey. So if you're like, oh my God, like put the 5-point harness on. 2 weeks later, I'm stuck in bed rest. I've got all these internal lacerations. Like I'm pretty messed up and like, I haven't been able to move my body. I'm not taking pain meds because it's just against, some of the wellness principles that I have. I want to know what hurts, how it hurts so that I can, do certain, whatever the heck. And I'm trying to stay positive, but like slowly and steadily, I just start to lose my mental health for the first time in my life. And these voices start to pop up of like, you're never going to catch up. Like you're not enough. And I'm like, whoa, happy, positive, playful, like, what the fuck? Whoa, like, you're not it. And I wouldn't acknowledge them. I would ignore them. The more you ignore it, the louder the voices get. And like, I think we all know some of this. So 2 weeks later, we get a call on the phone. And this guy calls me up. He's like, Chris, I'm like, hi, yeah, what's up? And he's like, do you still live in that old, like, beat up apartment down in Atlanta? I'm like, who is this, right? So
depends. Yeah, like
maybe, I don't know. Ended up being a family friend, and the dude is just frantic. He's like, dude, this is Steve. Like, I know we haven't talked in like a year, but like, I'm coming to your place. Like, get your brother home. Like, I just got to come see you guys. And like, dude was a bit of a shady character. And I'm like, so I call my older brother up, right? Who's like built like a brick shit house. I hope he listens to this. I do this every single time. I don't know if he knows yet. My brother is like 5'6". He's my best friend. He's like my hero, but he's 5'6" and I'm 5'9". So I like tower over him and make sure I know it, but he is so strong, right? Like, I've always been fast and cardiovascular and like I'm fit and strong in functional ways, but the dude's just a brick shit house. So he's like been my protector, right? So I like call up my protector at 20. They're like, hey Nick, like, you remember Steve? And he's like, yeah. He was like, he's on the way here. And he goes, on the way. So my brother dumps class, ends up coming back to take care of me, who can't get out of bed yet. And I hear my brother's truck rolling, and then I hear Steve rolling. And for whatever reason, I decided to get out of bed that day for the first time in months, right? Or the first time in 2 weeks. And I ended up getting out of bed, baby giraffe legs. For anybody that's been on bed rest for a while, you're like, oh, I'm like frail, right? So I'm standing in the door frame. My brother like puts the keys in the apartment lock and like opens the thing up and then like doesn't open the door. And I'm like, okay, like, what's going on? And eventually he comes in and I see my brother, older brother, and then I see like construction worker Steve over here. And they're both sobbing. Like, they're both just like crying. And I look at Nick and I'm like, dude, like, what's up? Like, are you okay? Like, tell me what's going on. He like throws his backpack off, like drops his phone and runs over and just like grabs me. And I'm like, Nick, what's going on, dude? And he told me that day, our dad, who also lived in Atlanta, ended up committing suicide that day. So that was 2016. It's been 8 years now, or it's coming up on 8 years this year. And no letter, no goodbye. You know, we know he was going through like a bit of a rough time and stuff like that, but you never know. And it's never expected. And, you know, grieving in and of itself, you know, I was 22 at the time when I got this news. And like, I had no skill set. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to feel. I didn't know how to grieve. I didn't know how to say goodbye to somebody that you'll never see again. All these other things started to pop up. That was like a huge like hit to me. And, you know, a month later, you know, school continues to go. I ended up dropping some classes because I just couldn't recover from being on bed rest for so many weeks. And then my dad had me and my brother. That my parents were divorced. So my brother and my brother's, you know, a year older than I am. We're trying to set up a funeral. I don't know how to set up a funeral. And like, what do we do with his body? Or like, what do we do with that? Like, we're trying to figure out all this crap all along the while. Like, my brother's trying to take boards and like, I'm trying to like finish like practicals and stuff like that. And like, I can't hardly walk. Like, it's just a shit show. So my brother and I do our best to try to figure this stuff out. And like, he's confused and I'm confused. And it solidified our bond together. Like, me and my brother are just like I could call him up and be like, I got a body. He'd be like, on the way. Like, that's where we're at now. Not that I ever saying that I need a body to hide. I do live in Florida. I mean, Everglades are pretty close, but it's never been anything like that. A couple more months go by, and then the most beautiful thing and the most terrifying thing on the face of the earth happens to me. And I get the news that at 23 years old, like, I'm going to be a dad. Surprise. I'm super broke in school and like, don't know what's going on. So 2017, trying to be excited about this thing, trying to pass my boards now, which are like 5K per test, not something you want to fail, right? Like, trying to get through all this bullshit. And now I've got my baby girl with me and I'm like, this thing doesn't have a manual, right? Like, how do you do this? And really shortly after that, I was solo single parent trying to figure out how at 24 at that time, how do I take care of this little girl by myself in a city that I don't have any family? And just like, do I take her to class with me, but she can't come to practical. So like, some of the other moms who were in this doctorate program, they're like, hey, go take your test, come back in like 20 minutes. I'll hold your dog. Like, it was like this weird handoff thing. And
wow,
all along the while, I'm like, I don't know what to do with myself. I'm lost. I'm confused. I'm living off student loans, trying to pay for diapers, like trying to do this whole thing. And I'm terrified. I'm terrified. My mom and my brother have been amazing, like helping out and helping me try to figure this thing out. So what ended up happening is I finished up my doctorate, didn't go to graduation for two reasons. Number one, I actually had a job at that time from my consulting firm that I started. In the midst of going through and finishing school and trying to be a dad and process grief, I was like, I'm going to start a business, which is still going today, called Elemental Shift Consulting. It's the company that I run, which is a blast. And I actually had a gig that I was going to, which was going to help me pay for that month's rent so that we could stay and live. I blew up graduation, never went, but finished up. And after that school, I went back to school for medical neuroscience. Then after that, I went back to school for advanced neuroscience. And after that, I went for like neuropsych. And the real reason, like the therapist reason for why I did that is I needed answers for why my dad left. Like, I really just wanted to know, like, was it chemical? Like, was it like, were we mad? Like, were we two? Like, I just wanted to know. And it ended up leading me down a journey of self-discovery, as these pathways often do. And now it's been, you know, like I said, coming up on 8 years since my dad passed away. I've been running this consulting firm now consistently for 7 years. And there's not a day I look past and go like, man, like, that sucked. And it was also for me in this really weird way. Like that, my dad like grew up as a farmer and a CNC machinist, and he was wise beyond what I could have comprehended in my early years. And I'm eternally grateful for that. And knowing that he was struggling, it set my brother and I on this path to live the lives that we have now. So like, I miss him every single day. And if he was ever going to leave us with a gift, it is the gift of pain and suffering and loss. It's allowed me to be the dad that I am today. It's allowed me to support the people that the way that I do now. And that's where I am today.
Yeah. Wow. I think that, number one, I appreciate the fact that you can share something that's so profound and tragic and difficult and be able to come out the other side of it instead of embittered, but you came out the other side of it, in a sense, empowered to use that to help other people.
I am now. And bitterness, and, trust me, there was bitterness. And there still
for sure.
Is, yeah.
That's, as you know, probably as good as anybody else, all of healing is anything but linear. It is that spiral dynamic of the staircase that's constantly revisiting those things over and over. And, but, you know, something that I read that you said that I think fits in with, you know, kind of my follow-up question to what you had shared was, you said something like, when I look around, I see a lot of suffering, but not much meaning. And my goal is to help people extract the pain of their suffering and step into their purpose. I love that. But, you know, it definitely seems like a lot of your experience helped shape that view. And so what are some specific ways that, not only from your experience, but also in what you do with people one-on-one or just in the work that you do, like, what are some specific ways that you help people define their purpose and extract that from the pain that they're going through?
Yeah. Oh, God have mercy. If we want bigger biceps, we do bicep curls, right? And the really slow, steady, consistent way is you can do, you know, 3 reps every single day and it's going to happen. But if you want quick and fast growth, right, there's going to be an aspect of discomfort, right? With the brain, with the mind, with our feelings and dysregulation, the discomfort that we experience is seen as a threat. In the gym, when we're doing curls, it's a controlled environment. So we can take on the threat and go, oh, that's not actually a threat. That's within my control. But oftentimes we don't have a sense of control or understanding for how our nervous system is shaping these things. So the nervous system takes an experience that's just played out and it shapes it into something that is more scary than it actually is, right? And that is not to say that any feeling that anyone has for an experience is not valid. All of those experiences are valid and they make a ton of sense. And those feelings need to be seen, heard, witnessed, and loved, right? And if that's not something that you can do for yourself in that regulated state, then co-regulation and borrowing somebody else's regulated state and perspective to share that is, like, you know, a huge reason for community and nurturing. So for myself, a huge chunk of what I had to do is to start to make sense of the stories I was telling myself, right? I knew the stories I was telling myself, like, yeah, some of them were accurate, but like, man, like I would really catch myself like spiraling. I'm like, this is not true. Like, where's this even coming from? Like I'm telling people about these things. And I'm like, that's not a version of me that is going to be beneficial. Like, I'm victimizing myself based on experiences that created emotional responses, but that were out of my control, right? So like, number one, I need to like validate the emotional responses that I have. And any emotion, including just giving yourself permission to feel, it is a skill. And anything that is a skill can be turned into a habit, right? So emotional skills and emotional habits, right? I started to break down, all right, there's the limbic system, but the limbic system isn't singular, isn't a singular purpose for where emotions are, but how emotions flow up through the thalamus to the frontal cortex back to the amygdala determines if it's a reactive emotion versus a regulated emotion. And I know we have to go from that reactive to that regulated emotion, but like, what's the bridge? And the science is like, we have to go from like an ACH pathway over to this pathway. And it's like, that's super great. But like, how do I take suffering of reaction and move it into gentle, calm, this thing's actually for me, right? Like we hear people talk about it all the time, but it gets like so etheric and so intangible and like all this other stuff that I just got so fucking frustrated with it. I'm like, that's super great, Ram Dass. I love you for that. But like, bro, like what's the 3-step plan, right? And that was what neuroscience gave me the foundation for, is like, this is your brain on stress and this is your brain in a regulated state. And here are some habits that get you regulated. So can I take that regulated state and then use it as a container to express my dysregulated self, so that my dysregulated self is in a container where it feels under control, like it feels prepared, feels certain, and then allow that thing to be experienced in the safety of my own body. And all of that, I know I say these things and now it's like, oh, it sounds like really like intangible and things like that. So I started to stack these up in 5 phases now of self-regulation. So the base platform, the most important phase of self-regulation is physical: sleep, diet, exercise, habit formation. Then we go to mental. This is certainty, predictability, and scheduling. Then we go to emotional. This is emotional intelligence. This is validation. And this is giving ourselves permission to be like seen, heard, and validated through a lot of those different processes. The 4th one is social, and this is communication, culture, and co-regulation. And then the last one is purpose and like mission, right? And that's the biggest one. And purpose and mission, I used to be like, oh, it's at the top of the pyramid. It's not the top of the pyramid anymore. It is the entire pyramid, right? It's like all of it. But the foundation of that, I unfortunately, and I don't know if you've seen some of these like extraordinary spiritual leaders, right? Like, oh my gosh, but they're not healthy, right? And we end up losing them way before their time. And that's where I'm like, man, that base platform of like the modern day, like a leader, like the modern day, I don't want to call it like a guru or anything else like that, to respect to like culture and things like that. But it's like, man, like I know that I'm such a better version of me when I'm well slept and I'm way more regulated. And then all the research starts compounding these things so much so that it's like, oh, so you're telling me if I get poor sleep, my propensity to be sensory overload and then dysregulated from that, and like I change my language models when I'm actually like underslept and dysregulated, like no wonder I'm having communication issues. Like no wonder parents in the first year, like more now than ever, divorce happens within the first year of having a child, now more than ever, right? Like we're overstressed, underappreciated, and nobody knows this stuff. Like if you knew in your head and you said to your spouse, like a couple months before, hey, this is going to be a rough season, right? What are some systems? What are some strategies that you and I can do as an us to stay on the same team against the stress instead of the stress creating division between us? I think it would save so many relationships. So I start to think and I start to strategize a lot of those systems of like, how do we take what we want externally and say that the skill that's going to take me here is A, and then how do I develop that skill in a daily habit? And now more than ever, that's very much what I do.
Yeah. And I think that it's important to educate, and there's real power in coming to an understanding. But I think, and you can probably also unpack this a little bit more, there's a temptation in particular within Western society to over intellectualize our problems, right?
Hell yeah.
To our detriment, right? We can work through all the problems in our head to a point where it's like, I've got this thought through and all these things that, you know, and it's over here in some other compartment. And, you know, not to beat on a cliche here, but, you know, our bodies are suffering. And so there's this disconnect.
Yeah.
So how, you know, would you encourage taking that practical step? Somebody who maybe feels stuck in their therapeutic practices, or, you know, are like, God, because I've been there even.
Same. I was there twice today before 11 a.m., right? Like it's the skill set. And this is a thing that we start to like learn and understand. Before we go in that, anybody that's listening, and I'm not sure if this gets aired on like a visual as well, but think of like an old school like thermostat, right? Like a thermometer, right? And it's like right at 70, right? For us that are measuring in freedom units. So it's at 70 degrees, right? And that's a nice regulated state. Some people, when stress occurs, they go up to 90 degrees. So they're overstimulated. Things are hot. And when you're hot, like everything feels like it has to move. Like molecules get more energized and like it's like, oh my gosh, but it's not a functional state for us to integrate, learn, and experience, right? So we have to figure out how to down regulate. We have to figure out how to downshift those people back to 70 degrees, right? Some people get brought back down to that state and stress occurs and they go into that functional freeze. And then they go from 70 all the way down to like 50. And then they just can't move because they're frozen in state. So all of these tools, all of these skills are very much designed for us to use models of thinking like that to go, okay, I feel frozen. I feel stuck, right? Inside of this, I'm never going to think my way into a better state of being, right? Some people can do that, but like that's after you've developed a shit ton of like physical habit-based skills, right? So mood follows movement, right? Plain and simple, mood follows action, whatever those things are. Like I just had it written on my arm, sticky notes all over the place that like the fastest way to modify how you're feeling is to take action, right? So like no matter what, and I tell everybody this, like if you feel stuck, you go on a walk. You feel like shit, you go on a walk. You feel happy, you go on a walk. Like walks are like, is the general solution for so many of these things. However, what I have seen, and this has its own caveats to it as well, is I've never seen somebody get adequate sleep, have good nutrition, and work out, lift heavy weights, and go for some walks on a daily basis and not improve. I've never seen it, right? Now, I know everybody has their own limitations to these things. And some of us, whether we've had physical disabilities that we're born with or that happen to us over time and we have our inabilities to go do those things, awesome. You also get the modification and invitation to open up curiosity and use our imagination a bit more to see how can I get my body moving in some of these ways. And that's why that's the base of so much of the work that I do. And that's why, when I take on one client, a huge chunk of that is I use Oura Ring, I use Apple Watch, I use Garmin. And all of those tools are designed to pull up the mirror of our lives and say, okay, I think I'm doing well, but I need objectives, right? I really want these objective data points. And that's why our coaching programs and how I consult and things like that have such a high success rate. Is like, it's not me against, the system and you're not implementing the system. The data very clearly tells us if the systems that we're teaching and implementing are actually working for you, right? And if they're not, it's not that we're screwed up. It's not that you're screwed up. If the consistency is not getting us the result, it just means that your nervous system has different needs. So it takes the guesswork out of it and it gets us back to this base platform where some people who are functionally stuck, like this morning, I get up at like 4 or 5 most days. I'm in the gym by like 5 or 6 most days. Yeah. Which some people look at it and they're like, oh my God. And I'm like, but I'm not. Like some people look at that and be like, oh my God, this guy, right? Like all the things and like this, that, and the other thing. But it's not all the time. Like in the summertime, like I'm gonna sleep till like 6:37, right? Like chilling, like my daughter's home. It's the summertime for us. I take on less clients. I got Tuesday, Thursday meetings, but like that's my like rest and recover. So like I'm up with the sun and down with the sun. We surf, we paddleboard, we eat at the farmer's market. Like we live a very simplified life and that leaves me really regulated. So the number one thing, like the fastest way to like make that modification of I feel stuck mentally, when you go on this walk, you get yourself moving, like your body wants to get the energy moving. That's why when we stay stuck, foot on the gas, foot on the brake, right? And then you feel the agitation of like burning your tires up. So the biggest thing that I would say is use that clarity or use the clarity that you need through the contrast. So you feel like shit. Why do you feel like shit? Right? Like start to identify it, start to get some of those better labeling mechanisms. Like we intellectualize the crap out of things here. And at the same time, there is so much utility that we can use with the language, right? Like so many people, myself included, are like, all right, there's three emotions. I'm happy, I'm hungry, or I'm horny. Like that's it. That's all I got in the system, right? And then there's bridges between those things where I'm hangry, I'm horny, and like, I'm like, but now it's like, oh man, like I think I'm feeling like frustrated due to the fact that like I know that I can be doing something right now, but I'm not doing that. So am I going to choose shame or am I going to choose to understand this thing? Right?
Ooh, you just touched on something big for me. Shame is often, speaking of the stories that we're telling ourselves. In fact, before our session that we're doing right now, my wife and I were meeting with our couples therapist.
Love it.
Yeah, just talking about some things going on, and it's a regular practice of ours, but shame just is one of those things that creeps in for me. Like we were talking about the different ways that we support each other when we're at our limits. We've got two boys, one who will be 9 in March and one who just turned 5.
Jeez.
Plus our jobs and plus other things that we're juggling and stuff. Naturally one person is got a little bit more capacity together. And, for me, I love having some extra space to myself, really having that emotional support,
Yeah.
that empathy that's like really, talking through shit. For Rachel, like she will be like, nah, just take something off my plate. Like that's what helps me feel. So I bring all that up because in talking through that stuff and you mentioning shame, I realize how much of a role that plays in different, I guess I would say, filters in which we interpret a lot of our experience. For the clients that you work through, let's say, who run up against shame, maybe they come from kind of religious upbringing, let's say, that was really ingrained. So they're, undoing a lot of religious trauma or some things of that nature. What is a lot of your practical advice for somebody working through some of that?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. This is where, like, let me say this like very clearly. I'm not a practicing licensed therapist whatsoever. So like these modalities or like whatever, the whole disclaimer, right? This is not medical advice, and Derek and I are not here to diagnose. For myself, right? I no longer participate in a church, which is just, that's what's right for me right now, right? I'm not saying that it's right or wrong if you do the same or if you do different, right? You got to do what's right for you. Like, how I find church and connect to my version of God is like out in nature right now with my daughter. Like those are our ways to go do it. However, the models that I grew up with were very much shame-based, right? Like that thing is wrong, repent, right? Like you should not have done that. Like, how dare you? Like how even you're having thoughts about that thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, it's not like, oh my gosh, like for me as a kid, I just remember like sitting there and thinking, I'm like, I feel like these things are just automatic in my brain. Like something must be really wrong with me. And it's like, no, like your brain thinks like your heart beats, right? When it stops, you're dead, legitimately, right? Like your brain is just always finding meaning and significance from things, right? So like whether you've watched a movie or done whatever, or your parents were fighting, or you were like, the victim of like childhood trauma and things like that, like your brain is finding meaning and significance from all of those things. And the stressful things in life are what provide so much of that context. So what I do is I say, awesome, like you've got this shame going on. I got my own shame. Tell me where the shame manifests itself. And let's start to like identify what the patterns are, right? Patterns are always a thing. If you can identify the pattern, like you can for sure learn how to break it. So we always go into this and like this one always gets people and they're like, yeah, no, this is the thing. This is where it shows up. And I go, awesome. If you had to make this so much worse, right? If you had to make your shame just like crippling shame, like how would you do it? And then they're always like, I would lie to myself and I would like probably lie about like how it really was. Or I would have this feeling of shame, but then I would like tell myself that I was actually okay. I would like learn to gaslight myself more and more to the degree that I started to believe the lies and distrust myself, right? And then that lies would become and like I hear this story over and over again. And I'm like, cool, yeah. And like, what do you think would happen if that was the way that you lived your life? Like fast forward like a year from now, you live this way every single year where you're like, no, I don't have that feeling, shove it away. Like I don't have time for this feeling. Like, I'm not doing as well as I could be, or imposter syndrome, all of these different forms of shame, right? Like who would you be a year from now? And pretty consistently what people say is they're like, honestly, like it would be like in a prison that I have the keys to that I refuse to leave, right? It's like I would give myself this weird fucked up Stockholm syndrome, right? Not to dismiss people that actually have that, but like I would be in imprisonment of my own creation. And then I would hide the thought of me having the keys to this thing. And then I would just live in the spiraling downward loops of sabotage and procrastination, always saying that it was outside of my control and somebody else's. And I would always know that I was the victim of my own creation, never taking responsibility for it. And that for so many people oftentimes will make them so emotional because they're like, I'm really close to that. Mm-hmm. Right? Like they're like, oh shit, like that's not that far away. But they've already identified the habits and routines that take them there. And I go, awesome. Write down the 3 habits and 3 routines that are going to make this worse, right? Just write them down. I'm not asking you to do anything with them. Write down those 3 things. Now, write down the absolute opposite of that, right? Number 1, I'm going to throw away all my emotions, right? I'm going to say that like, oh no, like I'm actually doing okay, right? Like work wasn't that bad. My boss didn't scream at me that bad, or like, had a hard financial month and like finance, like they're fine. Like I'll always recover. Right. And like, okay, like what's the opposite of that? And they're like, I don't like vulnerability. Like maybe like, do I like, do I just tell people do I tell myself how I'm feeling? And this is where I always mirror back. I'm like, what do you think? Like, what do you feel? Like, what would you do with something like that? Because a huge chunk of like, I think being a good coach or a good teacher and educator at this point is like, I have my own answers, right? But like, I can let me mirror these things back to you, and I can provide, potentially guidelines to make sure that things are moving in the direction that you told me you wanted to. But like mirroring back those questions is so beneficial because they're like, yeah, like I think what I would do is like, yeah, I think getting better connected with my emotions would probably be like a healthy thing. Instead of like throwing them away and then telling myself an intellectual story that dismissed my feelings, I think what I would do is I would better identify what those feelings were. And I just did this morning while I was so fresh. I would identify what those feelings were, where they were coming from. And then I think I don't know what I would do next, realistically. I think just identify like, oh, sweet. So now we can move to like step 2, which is like preparation. So like, if you know that you're going to go to the beach, do you put on a hoodie and sweatpants and like boots? So like put on a swimsuit, right? You need to be prepared for the environment. So if you know that you're going to go into an activating environment, what could you do better to prepare, right? And then people start to develop their own blueprints for emotional regulation, right? And then it's like, okay, so it's like by the end of these like sessions, they're like, okay, so like step 1 is like identify the environment, right? And I'm like, absolutely, right? And we can do that through some journaling, some reflection, some sharing with your wife, your partner, your kids, audio message these things out. Like there's so many tools available, right? And none of them are right and none of them are wrong, right? All of them are just for everyone, which like you pick one and go with it, right? KIS, keep it simple, sexy. Like keep those things down, right? Got to talk to ourselves in kind words. And then the second thing is like, all right, move into that space of like vulnerability and validation, right? Validation without vulnerability is like giving ourselves this like false sense of security, where it's like, oh, I am this thing. You're like, you're intellectualizing what that feeling is. Like, tell me what that is. And it's like, my stomach feels like there are shards of glass. And like every time I breathe, like I can't take a deep breath. I'm afraid if I take a deep breath, I'm going to fall apart. And if I fall apart, everybody else relies on me to be steady. And I can't do that. And then you go, okay, like if you fall apart, what happens, right? Like actually what happens? And then you can challenge the story, right? And it's not challenging the feeling from the story, it's challenging the story, right? So they would say like, if I fell apart, like, my wife relies on me to come home and just be like upbeat, and my kids rely on me to come home and just like be ready to go. So I'm always like, come in. And I'm like, so on the hard days, right? Does this sound like the pattern of the future you want? Where you're coming in, you're burnt out, you're exhausted, and you sit in your car before you walk in, and then you psych yourself up to be a version of you that you're actually not. Like, don't care what we say, they mirror what we do. So do you think your kids are recognizing that something's going on inside of you that's inauthentic to like what daddy actually is? Like, what are you teaching your kids through these behaviors, right? So there's days that I have hard days, and like my daughter, like I don't come in and go like, oh my God, baby girl, like what's going on? I'm like, hey, tiny, like monkey, like I'm having a hard day for some reason. So the thing that we were going to do, like, I don't know if I have all the energy to be able to go do that. And like, she's not disappointed because she's been raised in a house where she goes, oh, okay. So like, why don't we do a game night tonight? Right? Like the disappointment that we think other people are going to experience is purely based on the expectations that we have experienced from that trauma. Right?
Yeah.
Which again is just the mirror always pointing back to ourselves. Like, I really think I'm going to disappoint my wife. And I'm like, what if your wife has been like begging you to be emotionally connected that way? Like she wants to figure out how to support you. She knows, she's your best friend. She knows that you're struggle busting over here. Like she wants this more than you could ever imagine, right? She wants to nurture you. She wants to love you. And this is not like a roles right thing. This is not a men versus a women thing, because it goes both ways, right? Like half of my clients are women as well. High powered lawyers, entrepreneurs, all the things. And they're like, well, if I turn off the gas, then I'm not going to be the boss babe, or I'm not going to be this high impact, like all of these things, only to realize they're like, I can't, like the question that gets everybody is like, when's the last time you had fun and played for the sake of having fun and playing? And that one destroys some people's Mondays.
And it's so interesting. And even prior to our conversation, for some reason, that topic was on my mind actually as part of the healing process. and maybe I saw you talk about this and that's kind of what triggered it, but talk about that more, like play, the role of play and having fun, like how we start off life having fun and just like making meaning by just being silly and playing pretend.
Being bored and having an imagination. Like our imagination is weaponized against us in the age of information, right? Yeah. Like our imagination is weaponized against us in the age of information. And I say that so frequently is that if you don't know where your anxiety is coming from, kill your social media. Like your fast information, kill it, make it go away. Like I'm on social media and I do those things. My social media time is like less than an hour a day. And most of it is me responding to direct messages. Like I know how bad that is for my brain. So it's not a viable option, right? Like I'm in my living room right now and like our TV lives in our closet, right? Because like my daughter doesn't have access to that. Like I want her to feel the frustration of being bored and using her imagination. Like her imagination bicep is like gigantic. Like my like little girl, she's 7 now. Like she has the most amazing and beautiful imagination. And overthinking is our imagination disproving that we can actually make change, right? All it's trying to do is maintain the status quo. And overthinking, its job is to get you fixated, stuck, and on a loop, not on a spiral, right? That's its only job, is I just want to keep you stuck. When realistically, if we can invite ourselves back to curiosity and play, like life is so and I have a cheat code, right? Like my daughter's imagination, like is just crazy. So we play and we run and like we got plants growing all over the house. And like my daughter is super into origami. I got origami all over the house, right? Like it's just like the coolest place. And it's another testament to like humans can cultivate an environment that has play. Like I got wobble board, like I'm sitting on the floor right now, right? Like I have like, these are floor couches over here in the corner. Like they're meant to be like ran on and played with. Like I set the house up because I realized that I'm silly and goofy and like all the things. And if I'm not having a house that can have, our house is like very neat and organized, don't get me wrong, but it's neat, organized, and simple to maximize play and organization in that way. So like the living room where I'm sitting at right now was like a dragon's cave yesterday, right? And then like this very fuzzy blanket behind me is like our polar bear named Mr. Icy, right? And I put it on like all of these things that exist out there. And as adults, we're so afraid to be made fun of, I think. Like my daughter asked me this the other day. She's like, when we go to the park, you're like always running around and like sweating and you're gross. Like, why don't other parents do that? I did not have a good answer for her. I really didn't. And most of the parents, she's like, and I tell Phoenix like to be very observant of where people are in space. So her and I, one of our favorite things to do is we'll go to coffee shops. We both bring a book. She'll bring an activity book or origami. She'll do that. I'll read a book. And then sometimes, we'll just talk and observe. Right. And she goes like, she was like 3 and she always like pointed and she would do this. And then she'd go, what? And I was like, people on their phone? And she's like, yes. And I started to explain to her, people are on their phone because they like the distraction more than they like reality. So now she's to the point where, we'll see how much her therapy bill is when she turns 20. She's like, why are so many people brainwashing themselves on their phones? Right? Like she's like, that person's brainwashing themselves. That person's brainwashing themselves. Like, why do they do that? And, for good or bad, we looked at the park that day and she was like, all the parents are just brainwashing. And then like this kid's over here at the park also doing this with their mind. She's like, why is that? And I don't have a good answer. I wish that I did. I wish that there was something that made the most sense. But those people, unfortunately, like they're choosing to lose those years. And it makes me emotional. It really makes me sad. Like I have a mentor of mine. He is 89 now. And he worked all through his kid's childhood. He had 3 boys and worked through. And he goes, there's nothing I wish his kid's childhood. He had 3 boys and worked through. And he goes, every single day after school. And I never did it. He said, I did it once or twice. He's like, that is one of the biggest regrets I have in my life. I didn't take care of my body and now I have all of this money and to show for it, I have regret. Like, yeah, I'm going to be sweaty and super gross and like covered in wood chips. But like, I have the memories and I hope my daughter does as well. As like, I have the memories and I hope my daughter, she's a cool kid too. Here we are.
No, I love it. We were talking about play and
oh yeah,
my mind is going in so many different directions too. Obviously having two boys, this hits home for me. I find myself distracted. I could use scrolling as a coping mechanism, more than I should. And, we have gone through phases of being very strict with screen time and not, and some of those things. And yeah, but like, those are things that are very much on my mind about like how I'd blink and I go from thinking of like my oldest being in my arms on my bare chest in the hospital room as I bawl, seeing him for the first time, and him just telling me about how he's like in love, like he has his first puppy love little crush. And for me, it's just so crazy. Like we hear it, and I heard it, especially when, I first became a parent, like time goes by so quickly and you blink and they're grown. And it's true. It's one thing to hear it and another thing to experience it. And I think that also goes to just how vital it is to practice being present. And I commend you for the discipline that you've had and the ways that you've chosen to, parent as well. I think it is such an important reminder to, I heard it said not long ago that the best parents are the ones that are most exhausted, right? It's not easy.
I like that.
But like, being exhausted, sweaty, wood chips on you, all that shit. Like, are there times where you just kind of want to like check out for a minute? Yeah, of course. Like, absolutely.
And I do,
think
right? Yeah, like you do, I imagine. There's days where you're just like, yo, I can't.
Yeah, for real. With that too, I can also think about all those memories that like you shared as well, that, us really leaning into play and leaning into that childlikeness is such a healing thing, and how much we can learn from our kids. Like you shared about the profound question that your kid asked you. And, I'm thinking of so many moments where, they're as much of teachers to us as we are to them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a Seneca quote, I think that's out there that says, give me 7 years and I'll show you the man, right? Like those first like 5, 6, 7 years are so crucial. Like they're building so many instrumental belief systems and strategies and internal regulation coping mechanisms and all of those different things that are so important. And now that my daughter is like 7 and she's like, and I'm so proud of her, right? In all the ways. And I also want to remind parents that how you and I do this is our way, right? Like don't use this as a judgment. Don't use this as like a paradigm of comparison, because it's not. Like no one knows what I do to allow me to have that lifestyle or the effort that it's taken me to be able to play with my daughter in those ways and all of those things. So wherever you're at, like claim where that is as well. And like, man, I just remember like, not knowing what to do as a parent and just asking myself like, what kind of internal belief systems do I want to curate and cultivate for her when she's really young? Right. And it has really paid dividends for where she's at now, at least, for what we want and how I want her to show up and her authenticity and all those things.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that so mirroring and modeling, more is caught than it is taught, right? Kids pick up on a lot that they observe, which for me is like such a gut check.
Yeah.
Like shit. But I guess kind of transitioning from a communal sense, right? And we're talking about mirroring and supporting, and, as somebody's navigating their healing journey, you had mentioned it earlier too, having that communal support where you're co-regulating off of somebody else is immensely valuable, right? So how do you help people who maybe have at one point belonged to a community and maybe feel kind of like in this liminal space of not really knowing where they belong?
Yeah. Like loneliness is like an epidemic right now. Like truly, like it is, the research out there is like, it's bad. And I don't know how to adequately share how bad loneliness is and how much our current systems dismiss it or don't allow us the agitation. Like what loneliness is designed to do at like a biological level is to create drive to connect with other people, right?
Mm.
And like the longing that we have built into our biology to go out and seek relationship, friendship, intimacy, or whatever the heck that may be, is so being stolen from us, because originally we would get bored when we were kids, right? Like I grew up in the 90s. I think you and I are the same age, right? Or really close to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you got bored, you go, Mom, like I'm bored. And like, go outside, right? So then you're outside and you're like, who's this random kid? And they're out there pissed off, bored too. And then you're like, you want to play baseball with a rock and a stick? And it's like, sure. And as we grow up, obviously those systems like develop into more complex things. But one of the research studies that I saw on loneliness is like, it's as bad as smoking for our health, because it leads to
Wow.
these silent addictions. Like it's such a gateway drug, and loneliness is designed to get us out and to connect. But things like pornography, things like, social media give us such a loud and fast, like flash bang of a dopamine hit that it makes our like nervous system like ring with that we build an attachment and association onto that, instead of actually acknowledging like, no, I'm like real lonely over here, right? And like, it doesn't matter how many times I watch porn and jack off. It doesn't matter how many times I stay on social media. That feeling is constant and recursive, right? Because like, I need that connection with other people. And for a lot of folks, they might have had that in their childhood. They might have had it through high school and even through college and into their 20s. And then, everyone hits their 30s, then it's like, life got busy, right? Or like you get that split where I was in my early 20s and all my friends are still out partying, and I'm
Right.
8 p.m. putting my girl to sleep, right? I'm like, guys, I will not go out anymore. And like nowadays I have like maybe a drink twice a year now, because like, it's just like, I just can't, like, there's no way I could do that type of thing anymore. And it's how we relate and how we socialize in our early 20s is also this like paradigm for how it's supposed to be as we grow up. So like I have a group of 5 people who make up my inner circle. We don't drink together. We don't smoke together. We talk. This morning I talked with my buddy Jeremy. He's my COO, one of my like best friends, right? And what we were discussing is holding each other accountable to standards that we created in our conversation last week, right? And it's not always like that. Sometimes we're talking about, struggles that we're having in our relationship. Sometimes we're talking, he's got 2 boys, right? And he's talking about the struggles that he has, or he's like, man, like I build out all these systems and I help all these companies. Like sometimes I just struggle with my own inner discipline, right? In this modern world, like, there is this huge aspect of like bravery that we have to go out and like be rejected, but it's too easy. I think the pathway is too easy now to say, oh no, I'm an introvert, right? Like I'm not going to go out. It's just not my pathway at all. So I'm just going to stay inside, or I'll do this. Or like even dating, right?
Yeah.
Like I was a single dad from pretty close to the time my daughter was born, trying to figure this thing out alone. So like when I finally got to the point where I was like, okay, like I'm going to try to date, right? And I was single for like 6 years, and like I'll like complete that. Like, I'm like, I don't know how to do this, like dating apps, right? Like I never had dating apps. And then I'm like,
Oh yeah.
28, like on a dating app. And I'm like, this is unhealthy. Like I have swipe ability to judge a person based on like 3 or less sentences. And like people get married from this information. Like how many people did you swipe away that were your perfect? I'm like, what happened to like going out to a coffee shop or like meeting somebody at like a bookstore or like whatever the heck that it is? And that's not to shame the fact that like people use those things. I use those things, right? Because that's all you know until you know better. But like the community aspect of this, like that's why I run the communities that I do now. Because I know like just how horrific loneliness is out there. And like people want to like do this work, and they're like, I get asked like, how did you find your friends? And I'm like, one of my best friends is like a chicken farmer. His name is Nathan. He runs an amazing regenerative farm, right? But I met him at the farmer's market because like my daughter like wanted to go like help him when she was like 2 years old, like move the eggs to the cart. And like, he just was like, I mean, she could stay. And I was like, you seem like a safe person. Like she's a good gauge. I'm a pretty good gauge. And now he's Uncle Nate, right?
That's awesome.
Like he sends us a turkey at Thanksgiving, and like my daughter, and we've hung out at the farm. So my daughter knows how to get her fingernail. Like I met him at a farmer's market because like the people are out there. You have to be willing to like calibrate those things in. So I don't know if that answered your question at all.
No, it does. And I think also it speaks to, kind of the slow progression, or sorry, regression, I want to say, in our culture to be more withdrawn and not communicate with people, like
Yeah.
bare minimum, maybe like, but like, so growing up in LA, you never waved at a stranger, you never like said hi, it was just like whatever. Then I went to England. In
Oh,
England, it's like there's the British Reserve, and it's like you're walking on the same, sidewalk, you intentionally look the other way. And I love England. Like there's so many great things about the UK, but um, it's interesting that there's this movement in the West in a lot of ways that is towards this hyper individualism.
yeah.
And, going to the South, when I moved to the South about 10 years ago, that was like a very contrasting experience. People let you over in traffic, they waved to you, they were striking up conversations. And so that Southern hospitality was like a felt difference. It was a change in culture. And there's plenty that could be critiqued about that as well. But I bring all that up because I think we've lost the art of just putting ourselves out there and just striking up conversation.
Yeah.
I think some of my favorite moments are just like meeting somebody, let's say at a restaurant or a bar or something like that. Or, just getting to know people out in the community. And I think we get so in our head that like, oh, nobody wants to talk to me, or what do I say?
There's a million reasons, right?
Yeah, we talk ourselves out of it.
We always do, right? And like, I don't even know how else to say this. Like, I am like very extroverted as well. So like, please take all these things like, but I wasn't always like that. Like when I was super depressed and like big sad, isolate, don't talk to me, don't do anything. And there's a certain point in the line where you have to go like, if I stay like this, like I'm going to wait for my depression to get better. And it's like, no, like two-way road, right? Like I know when my depression is like healed, I'll be out and talking to people. So why don't I introduce that concept to my nervous system by going out and talking to people? I don't have the energy. Energy's never going to go, right? Energy is a state of mood mixed with like action. So like you don't have the energy, go out and take the action, and then the feeling's going to follow. Like
That's right.
there's so many different ways that we talk ourselves out of that. And I think one of the greatest things that we can do is just hold up the mirror. Like I say this to all of my really close friends, like friends let friends suffer in safety, right? I'm not going to take the suffering away from my friends, because that's like, once you understand like stress is for you, right? Like there was a debate out there recently that was asking a scientist, I cannot remember who, like, do you believe in God? Like with all the suffering and all the bad things that are going out there. And like in my head at this point, I used to be on the same side as the debater that was like, yeah, no, why a benevolent God is creating suffering, right? And then I look at the suffering that I go through, and that suffering hurt. Like I'm not going to deny that it hurt, but it has brought me a million times fold more joy, because it peeled back the blinders of my own self-perpetual agony and misery, right? Like suffering is not designed to be done against you. It's designed to move you into a form of adaptation that matches a new understanding. It's for you. And like, I can't think of like what a more fantastic gift could something that is above us and benevolent and understanding give us as a single species than like suffering to evolve. And I'm not saying that suffering that we self-perpetuate is not unjust, and that there's things that are not wrong and things that are just crimes against humanity. Those things exist, right? But oftentimes what I see as well is like World War II was an atrocity, right? Like we have to agree that was a horrible thing. And yet so many other good things came from that as well. The MRI machine, right? Which has saved millions and millions of lives, right? The stories that we're able to tell about how someone like that took power and like rise to create such a horrible thing, right? We can use that as a model in our future and go like, oh, when we see a person do that thing, that's probably not a good, like we learn as a species. That's the power of like the language that we have. You know, it's my 2 cents in a nickel, down another rabbit hole we go.
I'm all about rabbit holes. Being neurospicy myself, my life is a giant rabbit hole, side quest, however you want to phrase it.
Absolutely, yeah.
So,
How about it?
yeah, it's ADHD that allows me to have that superpower of rabbit holes and side quests. So
How about it?
you're all good. You're in good company. I know we're kind of coming to the end of our time together, and I just wanted to kind of close out just getting your thoughts around, like when it comes to having daily practices for one's overall well-being. We've covered a lot of ground and different ways that we can, some building these positive habits, right?
Yeah.
Where would you've talked about the 5 steps that you had mentioned.
Yeah.
Somebody who's listening to this and like, okay, I want to chunk this down and I want this to be something that I start practicing.
Yeah.
Number 1, how would you encourage someone to begin? And number 2, like, how long does the neuroscience, like how long does it take for someone to start seeing this affect one's lived experience too?
Without a doubt. These are super good questions. So I would always tell people begin with physical. There's a reason that I use that as a benchmark because it's binary. It's, did you work out today? Yes or no. It's not like, did I feel my feelings today? It's like, I felt some of them. It's a very binary process and it's going to hold up a lot of contrast for you. So what I tell most people who are like trying to get started is every day, find 20 minutes to go for a walk, right? On that walk, listen to something educational, something motivational, or call a friend, right? If you don't have 20 minutes every single day, you don't have a life, right? And I know that is a hard critique. There's a reason that I wake up at 4 a.m., right? I have these systems. I'm single dad for a long time, finishing a doctorate, started up a business, run a big social media platform or whatever. There's always an excuse, but it only takes one reason, one hope, one motivation to get yourself started. So I would hit on that walk and then the most slept on thing. I wish there's this magic neuroscience thing that's out there, but there's really not. It's set goals. Realistically, I think we drift so much in the limbo of I'll be better when, and it's I'll be happy when, or I'll do this when. And it's just, to me, I 100% understand that your system is designed to think that way, to be as passive as possible. Set a week-long goal. Anchor onto something that you're looking forward to. The neuroscience of habit formation, there's 3 steps to it. It's trigger, action, reward, right? So find ways to celebrate in your everyday life, and up and beyond that, set those goals because the habits should be developing a skill, right? So journaling, I've been journaling. I got my journal with me right now, right? I journal all the time, right? And also work out. So someone would look at our lives and say you have a relationship that's doing well. You're both parenting really well. It seems like you both eat well and you exercise and you're educating and doing a purpose-led business. Okay, this week I am going to do all of those all at one time, right? And then we end up going out and then we get destroyed 2 weeks in because it was just too much for our system to tolerate. So we go out fishing and we're I can't wait to go fishing. You get the Mickey Mouse rod from Walmart and you catch a great white shark and it pulls you to the bottom of the ocean. It's all right, maybe just a little bit too much. So my invitation to everyone is going to be, great. You want to make change in your life? 1% change. That's how I got to where I am in life right now. Truly, and it sounds so silly, but do that 1% change. And if I could start with anything, anywhere outside 20-minute walks is the thing. It gives you optic flow, which is going to release healthy amounts of normal dopamine, not pleasure reward dopamine, but drive dopamine to do more things. Optic flow is really good for that, which is when you're walking forward, you're fixed on the horizon ahead, but your peripherals see things going by and it creates this optic flow, which is really healthy. Zone 2 cardiovascular exercise is as effective, if not more effective, than some antidepressants, which take 6 to 8 months to get up into the system and functional. Cardiovascular exercise is really good. We know that journaling also really effective to get to better associate these patterns and recognitions and learning small things, right? So my 10 seconds of coaching on this is great. You've identified what that one thing is, right? Now set the goal for the end of the month. It's the start of the month, whatever it is, set a 4-week goal or read a book called The 12-Week Year. Love that book. That's how I run my companies. That's how I do everything. That's how I run my parenting life, all those things. 12-month year or 12-week year. Set that goal and do a ramp up to it, right? And then the only thing that matters once you have the habit is how and when. How and when, right? You're going to walk. That's your goal. I want to walk 7 days. I want to walk 20 minutes a day every single day. How and when, right? I'm going to do it at 5:30 a.m. and I'm going to go out and go do those things. And then you have to take proper stock and inventory. If you've been waking up at 9:30 a.m. and then you're like, I'm gonna start waking up at 5:30, you have to know that there's gonna be 3 days for your circadian biology to catch up. And it's gonna be 3 days of absolute shit. But that fourth day, I guarantee it, your system's gonna wake up right before your alarm goes off because it's like, all right, I get it. We wake up at this time now. So you have to ramp yourself up to those things. And this is where knowledge becomes power, where it's like, I am gonna suffer for 3 days, it's gonna suck. But as long as if I could do it for 3 days and I can make it through those 3 days, the fourth day is way easier, the fifth day is way easier, the sixth day is even easier. And by the seventh day, your system's like, this is just who we are, right? And then solidifying those neurological processes, yeah, the myelin sheath and the myelination process and all that, yeah, it takes like 62 days, but like it starts on day one. That's what I would tell most people. So how and when, set the goal, schedule it in. Brain loves certainty.
Yeah, I love that because, you know, sometimes we can get overwhelmed by standing at the base of the mountain and we're like, how in the hell am I going to scale this?
It's impossible. Yeah.
Right. But it's one foot in front of the other. I you know, to kind of close up here, and just give my parting thoughts. I last year I trained for a half marathon with my wife, and that was hard shit.
Oh, fuck. I can't imagine.
She recently ran her first marathon, and
damn.
God, that is maybe one day I'll be able to do that. I don't have that as my fitness goal. I love working out, lifting weights.
Same.
That's
lift heavy shit. Yeah.
Yep. But, I will say the thing that got me when I finally ran that half, I was getting through it and it was like, holy shit, it was setting in. I was getting exhausted, but I just kept saying one foot in front of the other, one foot in front of the other, and just breaking it down, right?
Yeah.
I'm not thinking about, oh my God, I've got 10 more miles to go or something like that. It was like, oh, another mile down, and that celebration, but also just like that focus on just getting that next foot down and just keep going, right?
100%. Like if you had a year to climb Everest, would it be as scary as climbing it in 2 days? Right? Like we stack up the evidence against us. Like we play devil's advocate, but we never use the advantage of time. And then we like a year from now, we'll be setting our same New Year's resolutions that are the same shit in a different format, right? Yep. Versus the people that are making those micro changes, and there's no way to convince somebody that is the path. Like the really successful people that you see, they just did one step in front of the other and they use time. So like, great, I'm going to start a business that makes its first $20,000 this year, right? I got 365 days to do it. You got to make like $100 a week to go get that. Like, awesome. You got time to figure it out if that's that goal. And the functionality that your system feels that it's doable is what starts the inertia for drive to do the thing. Like that's where motivation comes from. If it just snowed on Everest and I put you in a pair of flip-flops and say like, good luck there, Sparky. You got no bag, you got no anything, but there's a blizzard coming. It's like, why even try? Right? And that's where most people motivate themselves out of fear and shame and guilt. So yeah, be gentle with yourself as well.
I love that. Being gentle with that art, like that is, it's hard in the, evolution, the progression of ourselves to have that patience and have that grace. But
yeah, I'm horrible at it. Getting better every day.
Hey, that's it. And that's part of it too, right? I mean, as we heal, as we grow, as we, put these goals in place, it's walking that tightrope of being able to show ourselves the compassion and gentleness that we need to keep us moving forward. So yeah, Chris, I've taken enough of your time. I probably could talk for another hour with you. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, dude, it's been amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, man. If people aren't following your work, where can they find you on this worldwide web of ours?
Everything is Dr. Chris Lee, DrChrisLee. That's my handle. It's, drchris.io is my website, or you can go to drchrislee.com. Like if you search me, it's for the most part comes up, or it's another person who's a cardiothoracic surgeon. Great guy too. We talk all the time about who's going to buy the next handle for our stuff. But no, I'm out there. And yeah, what I would mean and what I would say is like, reach out to people like your podcast host here, like Derek, like they want to help you so bad, and they have the tools and the skill set to go do that. And like, they're people that just want to support you. So if you ever guys need that support or you feel alone, always reach out. Like, and I'm not just speaking, I'm obviously speaking for you, my bad, but like you guys can reach out to me, reach out to the people that you're like, oh, I appreciate those people. We are doing our best to connect with everyone.
Absolutely. All right, my friends, stay tuned. Make sure you're following Chris, and appreciate you tuning in.
Yeah. See you next time, guys.